some people are actually being paid to not do what they can't not do. It's not uncommon for your organization's immune system to work very, very hard to keep you from doing bad at work.
This is the Vin Jones Podcast, Secrets of the Engaged Employee, with Kevin Jones of VinJones.com.
All right, welcome to another edition of the Vin Jones Podcast. I am here with my friend Marcia Conne. How you doing, Marcia?
I'm doing pretty well today. Thanks for asking, Kevin.
Good. This Marcia Conne and I go way back, years from conferences, and we've worked together on different projects, and it has been a delight getting to know her and chumming around with her and learning. I've learned so much from her. So you're one of my idols. Oh. Well, in a good way. In a good way, okay. Of course.
Mutual fan club or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. I'll head. If there's a fan club of yours, I'll head it up for you. Just let me know.
We'll do the same. All right.
Yeah, good. If you would, Marcia, just tell people kind of where your focus is, what you're doing now. I know, I'll just point this out for you. You got just did the second edition of the social learning, the new social learning book, version 2, yes. Edition 2, and just finished that up and published it out. And glad to have that done, I'm sure, and out the door. So what else are you doing? What kind of work are you doing? Where are you focusing?
These days, most of my attention is focused on organizations and people who are working on making an impact. That's the thing that I care about the most in my soul, my heart. And so rather than cleaning up the messes, I've been a corporate fixer for 20 years now. I'm using those same sorts of skills and applying them to, say, people, projects, and organizations that are interested in making a real difference in the world, moving us forward as opposed to backwards, which I sometimes feel like is happening too often.
Okay, so you talk about making an impact, I guess, on a personal and a company level, both. For me, I see a lot of companies that just create something because it's the new thing, whether it's software or hardware or a product or service or whatever it is, and they just do it because the market is open. What have you found to be the difference between a company that just creates something and someone or a company that has a real purpose to go for and wants to make an impact? What do you see as the difference?
Well, in that particular instance, I find that especially from entrepreneurial perspective, for example, if it's an entrepreneur who is interested in starting out and creating something that hasn't ever existed before, for example, the two categories you really framed out, which are those who are doing it because there's a market need or there's a market opportunity and they think they can make a lot of money. I have found out, I will admit, that there are more and more of those who are doing it because they want to make a lot of money so then they can spend that money and do something to change the world. And they see that as their opportunity to sort of get the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Yeah. I don't spend my time with many of those, I will admit, because so much of the work is in chasing after the gold, as opposed to making that difference. But good, if that's the way people choose to do it, good for them. I don't have any issue with that. It's those who are doing it because they want a fancier car or they want a bigger vacation or they want something that is more materialistic that just doesn't hold my attention. And so I don't spend my time there really either. I'm more interested in focusing on the people and the organizations that either are on an entrepreneurial journey or are existing organizations that are thinking we can work differently. We can work in a way that is respectful of the human spirit, that doesn't ask people to leave their personalities and their consciences at home or at the door or even in their car on the way into the office, that they can do what is needed in the world together with other people to make a difference. And that's where I find it to be something that not only holds my attention, but needs more people focused on. And so that's where my attention lies, and that's where I hope that more and more people actually would focus their attention too. You can be doing whatever your job is, but you can be using those skills for, I joke sometimes, for good, not evil. So right. It's a matter of mindset in that case.
So you've talked with a number of people and a number of companies that have probably very, very varied purposes. What are some of the more interesting purposes that you have seen? Ones that you may not have thought of before, or that were kind of surprising, or that were really intriguing to you?
Well, these days I found myself drawn once again to learning and education. I'm finding more and more organizations, both entrepreneurial and larger organizations, that are not trying to tackle sort of a school reform or workplace learning head on. Those are pretty big beasts, and they have not only a lot of embedded practices and just a lot of legacy history, but they're looking underneath those. So the concepts of social and emotional learning, for example, which should be underpinning so much of our schooling. I'm excited to see that getting more and more attention. Thinking more about what it requires to help whole communities get out of poverty by actually helping the people in those communities understand what their innate capabilities are and what the resources are available to them to be able to break the cycles that they have been in their communities. And also, and perhaps more importantly, that it's not all up to them. There is in this country especially this presumption that you, no matter what horrible weight is stacked against you, are capable of being able to change your circumstance. Well, I just don't believe that anymore. I believe in many cases there are resources, there are capabilities around you, people who can help out that you just wouldn't know about. And so It's the connecting of people and resources and ideas with people who have the will and the interest that has been able to make a big difference. So that's one area that I'd say I didn't realize I was going to be pulled back into that area, but I'm very excited to see that happening, and I'm really energized by some of the work that's being done. Innovation, so that we actually we work with kids, young kids who are still very innovative and very creative, and they're actually coming up with inventions that adults in some ways are incapable of because they've suppressed that energetic innovation for so long. And so a really interesting innovation program called Makeosity that is bringing the maker spirit and innovation back into the younger grades with the younger kids. So those are a couple of different examples. But I do want to point out also on the health and wellness side of actually helping communities, large communities, getting more healthy by actually understanding what are all the determinants of health. And that's not just the food we take in or the exercise that we get, but it has to do with how many sidewalks are in our communities, how easy it is to access really wholesome food in very small, isolated communities, not just from a 7-Eleven, for example. But these are some of the things I just hadn't ever really thought about before or hadn't been introduced to before. But when you listen to the people who have really spirited ideas and are determined to turn their communities around, their family situation around, their society around, you discover that at the most local level, they're doing some amazing things. And it would be wonderful, which is what I'm trying to help introduce, some of the networks and the resources available to help really take off and to be able to spread.
Very good.
A big answer. Sorry.
No, that's good. That's wonderful. Wow. So let me ask about this, really this purpose piece overall, if I could. As you talk with either again a company and you can take this from a personal one person standpoint or a company standpoint, what is the difference that you've seen in practices or innovation between the company or the person that has that purpose and the company or person that doesn't?
My first I jump too quickly is just the issue of fear. That I find that so many people are fearful that if they were to lose this job, for example, then they wouldn't be able to pay their mortgage, or they wouldn't be able to set aside money for their kids to go to college, or they wouldn't have insurance. These are some of the very practical matters of the average family that we often forget about when we ask them to do something that seems quite risky at work. And that is to do something for a reason, for a purpose, as opposed to just doing their job, which is quite a safe thing to do.
Sure.
And so I find that a lot of that, the difference between the people who can find that purpose and who can work towards it, and those who may aspire to do that, and some frankly don't, which is another matter, that those who aspire to do it, it really has more to do with helping them understand that this isn't a risk-averse activity, and that this isn't a risky behavior, that you create a culture in the organization where you realize that if you don't ask people to bring their full selves and their full spirit and their full passion and purpose to work, that it's never going to be a great organization. And that's when we can actually start turning the tides and make a difference in the organization. But if we just ask people to, do this for more purpose without there being the organizational supports around that there are some people who, I couldn't care, they couldn't care less. They're still going to do what's going to drive them, and good for them. But for the rest of the folks who really are fearful of what the cost of doing that would be, those are the folks that we need to help understand that they can have both in that particular instance. It's not going to be easy, but they absolutely can do both.
Right. So I guess on one side of the scale, there's the impact that someone can make, but then there's also that risk of the cost that would come from going after that impact that they have, and that fear that you talk about. Can you give me an example of someone who has switched from going after, giving up that cost and saying, you know what, you're right, there isn't as much fear here. There isn't as much risk as I thought there was, and I'm going after this impact that I want. Can you give me an example of that?
I'm not sure I can do it that simply, but
Sure.
I will say when I've been able to watch and been able to assist with the transformation of people, being able to find their voice and be able to find their purpose and be able to make that impact. Sometimes it's helping people truly just begin by understanding what their superpowers are. And that sounds, it sounds so comic book-ish that usually people, laugh a little bit about it. But I have found that most everyone, I'm trying to think of some exceptions, but that has some sort of superpower. And what I mean by that is something that they do so naturally and so easily that it just, it's something that they just do as easily as breathing, that other people look at and think, oh my gosh, I wish I could do that. And more importantly, the person who has the capability believes that anybody else can do it, but the reality is they can't. So it's a thing that they don't really value in their own lives all that much because they think it's so easy for them. But when they find that, and sometimes it requires going to their peers, going to their family, going to others and saying, what is it that I do that you think is my superpower? And people often find the answer that way. Whereas when they look inside themselves, they think, well, that's not super. That's a power, sure, but it's not that super. Anybody could do that. They discover that people think, no, I can't. I mean, and they could be, silly things. I hear a wide variety of different sorts of answers, So part of it is just figuring out what that is. So once people figure out, so I had a woman that I worked with, she can just rattle off taglines and marketing slogans in that case, just so easily. They come naturally, really? They come constantly. She just spits them out, all the time. And she just assumes everyone can do that. And when we actually, showed her that was clearly not the case, that the vast majority of slogans in the whole organization were hers, she began to realize that this was her superpower. Not something that she'd ever thought about before, but that was just what she did. So, one, they restructured a little bit of her job so that she was doing more of that work, which was easy and fun and so valuable for the organization. And other people who that was a real stretch and was hard and it was something they didn't like doing, there was less and less of that. So in that particular instance, we saw a switch in her adoration of her job. Her stress level go down. The value to the organization go up. But more importantly, that she has a whole bunch of additional work she does outside of her company. So she volunteers for several different organizations. And that also takes a toll on her time and her energy. Well, she said, what if I did that for the other organizations too? What if I did that for the Boys and Girls Club in my community? What if I did that for the food bank in my community? And all of a sudden, what became something that she did, she felt almost obligated to do that in her community, which is a wonderful instinct to have.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, that became lighter than air also.
Nice.
And she helped provide a free service to these organizations that they could benefit from immediately. Their blog posts got more attention quickly because they had better titles. Their marketing presentations got more attention because she just had that. Now, she'd been, stacking cans before, which was something that many people could do. And there probably was somebody that was their superpower. But in her case, she could do something a little different, and it had a huge impact. But it all began with just figuring out what could she do that lit her up and that she could do more easily than anybody else in that case. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, I love that. Yeah, because I have to agree, because the whole superpower thing, trying to think of what that is, right off the top of my head, I'm like, yeah. But as you said, it comes more. It's just naturally what you do, and you don't even think about it. There have been times when I have felt that superpower, and I felt, wow, I can do that really well, but unless you're in the moment, it's hard to recognize exactly what that is, and it doesn't. And everyone's circumstances are different, so that those superpowers sometimes come out more often or less often. And so you may not have the opportunity to recognize that.
Or you can adjust your environment or your situation to do more of that and less of some of the stuff that is really crazy and hard. And I'm not suggesting that there aren't crazy and hard things that we each need to do in the world.
Right.
But what if we were partnered with people who those hard things, that was their superpower? I mean, that's really what it boils down to in a lot of my work, is figuring out how to, reorganize, how to re-network what we're working on, so that we have the people who this is easy, fun, natural for them, can be working on those things, and it takes the weight off of it. Infrastructure is the one I use. That's what I do. I figure out what is the systems and processes necessary to be able to make amazing things flourish. I do that in my, just nonstop. And a lot of people, that to them is just the most painful thing in the world, is figuring out how all those pieces would fit together. And so, I'm a great partner in that particular instance, because I can help, not actually even just help, sometimes just do. And that's a big key piece of it. It's not to say, well, let me teach you how to do that, which is the model we've often thought about. Let me, teach you my superpower. Well, let me just take that off of your plate and be able to help you do that. And together, it'll happen a lot faster, a lot easier, a lot smoother, and it will be more successful for both of us.
Right. Very good. So you in there, you alluded to connecting people with superpowers, and you mentioned that earlier, taking communities, whether it's like a neighborhood community or city community, or even a community within a company, and that the secret is really connecting them to each other. I'm curious, how is that? There are lots of different ways within a company to connect people together as well. How do you do that on a community level?
Mean it within an organization, or in society at large, in the civic community? In
society at large.
So going back to the question you asked earlier about purpose, is that what I find in working, say, in my community, is to have a sense as to what in the community pulls people through. What is it that they are working towards? What is it that they want to contribute to that community? And in many cases, it's not so cut and dry. It's not like, I would like to contribute this.
Sure.
But these are things I care about the most. And that's something that we haven't always asked those questions. What is it that you can't not do, is another question that I often ask, which is something that you are drawn to, which is, I couldn't ignore this big need or problem in my community and sleep at night. So I have to work on this, even if it's just a matter of reading in the newspaper and keeping up with it, which is at some level, at least attending to something. And then perhaps there's some part of it that draws them deeper into the community and into what they're doing. But at that point, wherever the rallying point is, that perhaps, whatever issue or project or topic is there, is that's a great place and a great time to sort of spend a little bit of time paying attention and asking those questions about people's superpowers, or what is it they enjoy doing, or what is it. I often find, especially on a community level, that people will say, well, I really want a recent one that I hear a lot is, I want the food in the schools changed. That's a really big concern for a lot of communities.
Sure.
That in the schools, what they're feeding the kids is pretty horrible, and that doesn't need to be. There's some amazing programs across the country that are introducing, without any more cost, or introducing very healthy foods to kids, making that available to them. So I'm using that as an example. And so someone will say, well, I want to change this. I'm like, okay, well, what is it that you want to change about it? Well, here's my goal or objective. Okay, well, what is it that you bring to the table that you could contribute to help make that happen? And it's to some extent breaking it down into the pieces and parts. This is it. I'm an infrastructure person. I'm constantly thinking about how this can work, and how can you contribute to that? Are you going to petition? Or are you going to you're just going to pack your kids' lunch? I mean, there's some things we thought about from the outside, but we haven't actually thought about what we can do in terms of a campaign, or some of the things that, frankly, we've learned in the corporate world as to how change happens. What is the change management process? And those are things that we can introduce, not by introducing the big, heavy language of change management, but understanding that it requires communicating. It requires alerting. It requires perspective transformation. And be able to introduce that at a community level can make a big, big difference.
Good. Now, the reason I asked you about that specifically within the community at large, society at large, is because I think we can learn a lot from that for our companies as well. If we always talk about the companies and ourselves, we kind of get in a rut. And you talk about the big language of, or the confusing language of change management, and we can get so stuck in those terms and in different ways of doing things that we forget that everyone is really changing all the time. How do they change? And so how do we do that within a society? And how do we help people contribute to that? And I think there are some great lessons learned in there for anyone in a corporation on how we do it within the corporation, and that we can pull from the society perspective.
And actually, I think that goes both ways. So asking that question, which is what is it that you can't not do? What's weird and sad, I guess would be a better word, difference between in an organization or where you're being paid for the work and where you're not being paid for the work, for example. Though in a society, I can go into a long time about how what the economics are there. It is that some people are actually being paid to not do what they can't not do. So, that if your superpower is speaking the truth, if you're the person who points out the emperor has no clothes, for example, and you do that in your life, you do that at home, you do that in your community, that's your role. It's not uncommon for your organization's immune system to work very, very hard to keep you from doing that at work.
That's true. Yes. That's very true. And I've seen that
and
so many times.
In that particular instance, think about all the organizational energy that's being wasted, it's being dissipated because of that. So perhaps it's that there's a way for people to be able to, be that truth teller in a different sort of context, or maybe you should, as an organization, get better at honesty. One of the key sort of, turners of the tide I see in organizations is actually just helping organizations become more honest and being more receptive to people pointing out what no one is talking about or is not being said. And that seems like such a simple thing that we should learn from the community around us. Is that though there is some sort of being polite that happens in our communities, people feel a far stronger pull to suppress what they know to be true in the workplace. Because again, going back to that risk or fear that they might lose their job or that they may not get a promotion or something like that.
Sure. Wow, that's good. That's so true. You're right. So many companies do suppress that, and then it's almost as if there's the swim lane. the companies often want you to swim in the swim lane that you were hired for, period. And if you go out of that, they will pay to put you back in that swim lane, even though that's what your superpower is. And that's where your strength is. And that's where you really, really want to contribute, and you feel most comfortable, and you feel energized because of that, and they take that out. Most of the times, it's not intentional. But that is the result that happens. And they can't have, to the original point, they can't have the impact towards that company's purpose that they could.
Yeah, so it's a lot. So there's an element of rearranging the deck chairs. I mean, there really is just an element of understanding what people not just are capable of doing, what their skills are, because in theory that's what they were hired for, but what they're capable of, and where's the intersection of those skills and that passion and that drive and that attention to detail. I also find that when people are focused on things that they have purpose about, they attend to making it right and good, way more so when they're just using it because it's a skill they can. They're just not that connected. And so you have organizationally the risk go down because people are so much more connected and they want to do what's right. They're not trying to figure out some scam around it or some way around it or trying to hack the system. They're doing it because it's the right thing to do, and that's in large part, that's the optimal situation to be in.
Very good. True.
I want to add one piece to this, and that is that what I hear a lot is from people saying, well, I have these other skills and passions and purpose that I can use only when I get to a certain level in the organization. In fact, I hear this as surprising. I'm surprised at how often I hear it, of people saying that when I get to be a director, I'll be able to use those other skills and talents. Or when I get to this other level, that's when the people really have access to be able to do these other things. Well, I spent a lot of my life with the directors and the VPs and the C-level folks, and that's just not true. That's a myth they have, that sort of the higher up you go in the hierarchical chain, the more latitude you have in your activities. And I just don't find that to be true. You have more purview. You actually see a wider perspective of what's capable, but it doesn't mean that your job has loosened up to a point where you can really focus more on what your superpower is and less on those other things. It's not like you can just hire a cadre of people to do all those things that you suck at. Right. It doesn't, not that simple. And so it makes a lot more sense to figure out how you can be helpful and connected and purposeful wherever you are. And that is a far more likely turner of the tides and far more likely to be successful than sticking with your lane until you get to a high enough position where you can move out of your lane. Doesn't usually work so well.
Yeah, that's a good point. I've seen many people finally decide, you know what, I'm going to do what I am good at. And not only are they able to apply it to their current positions, whatever that is, but they almost create a new something, whether it's a new position or a new responsibility or a new role or whatever it is, and it takes them in a completely different area. So you're right, when I'm director or VP or whatever, a lot of times you would not be able to use your superpower if you went to that spot. So it becomes a trade-off. Do you want to make an impact, or do you want to climb the corporate ladder and get to that spot for other purposes, which may be good as well, but we've got to make that decision.
Yeah. Well, so there was the big topic of job sharing a number of years ago. We heard about it a lot more than we hear about it today.
Sure.
And I find that to be something that I come back to with people very often. And that is, it doesn't have to be done at the organizational level. It can be done at the team level, or it can be done with individuals finding sort of their complements in the organization. And that is that so often job descriptions are a true mixed match of people's skills. Right. There are a number of things that need to be done, but they're not necessarily, you're going to find that in one person. So you're asking one person to do what they're great at and to do what they're really horrible at, so they can fulfill whatever that job description is. Well, one of the simplest things you can do is find somebody else it's the opposite, who has either a similar sort of role, and it could be even a small team of people that together, that if you re-divvy out how the work is done, you can each have far more success in what you're doing. And it's almost so simple, it's silly. And so it's a matter of asking people, of listening, of attending to people, and encouraging them to find these other ways of working. And then you do have to sometimes find a couple of hacks. For example, if somebody in the another department is doing half of your job and you're doing half of their job, the report, because that's their superpower, can't go in under their name. So you sort of work out some of those little logistics so that you can both be very successful, and people just feel so much better about the work they're doing that it makes sense. Now the question becomes, how do you reorient the organization so you don't have to ask? You're not asking them to be doing these crazy jumping through hoops. But frankly, that's sometimes harder.
Yeah.
Just having people rethink about how they do their work.
I agree. Yeah, sometimes that gets in the way rather than it makes it more difficult to do that right thing, whatever that is. Then, yeah. So out of this whole conversation, I think anyone who's listening or watching on YouTube can pull out so many different things that they could go and do. But if you had one challenge for them, what would that challenge be to make, I don't know, on a superpower level or impact level, or what would it be?
Get on with it. That's it. I've found that there's so many people I spend time with personally and professionally that are waiting. They believe that one day they're going to get out of bed and that the situation is going to be right where they can do what's important to them. Or it's going to be the next job, or it's going to be when they can retire, or it's going to be when their kids go off to college, or it's going to be, and I can keep going on and on. Well, the reality is, D. Hock, who is the founder of Visa International, once said, it's far too late and things are far too bad for pessimism. We have to get on with it.
I like it.
Each of us have to figure out a way to be able to make a difference using the skills, passions, interests, and purposes that we have. And the challenge in our lives, because gosh knows we are not using all of our capacity and not using all our brain span, even if we were exhausted at the end of the day. Somebody just challenged me about this a few days ago. But we have excess capacity. We can do things very easily, even when we are exhausted. And if we could reorient our lives, our work, in just even sometimes small ways, we will find that we have a well of energy, heart, compassion, and care for doing what needs to be done in the world. Even if it's just a matter of being honest. Maybe it's just a matter of peeling back the things that aren't working, and that will free up some additional energy. But I believe we all are capable of doing something that we are not doing today for whatever reason that is holding us back. And so if we need to remove some of those obstacles, or we need to find what is easy for us and get on with it. That is really it. Get on with it. It's time.
I love it. Time to get on. Love it. Thank you so much.
Why spend 10 hours a day doing work you only tolerate? The more engaged your team is, the more productive they will be. These are the secrets to helping them love their work. Learn how to love your work and create an engaged workplace. Visit vinjones.com.